Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Empowerment Project, Module 10, on digitizing 3D collections in museums. The Digital Empowerment Project is a nationwide initiative organized by the 6 U.S. regional museum associations dedicated to providing free, self-paced training resources focused on digital media and technology for small museums. This series of online webinars and toolkits is made possible by funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and we are delighted to have you with us here today. My name is Dan Yeager, and I'm the Executive Director of the New England Museum Association, and I'll be your host for this final module of the series. Before you get started, I'd like to acknowledge the places in which we gather. In this era of virtual meetings, when digital spaces may substitute our physical sense of place, it's important to reflect on the land we each occupy and honor the indigenous people who have called it home. I'm speaking to you from Swampscott, Massachusetts, north of Boston, the historical homelands of the Massachusetts peoples. Wherever we are, let us all acknowledge all indigenous nations as living communities, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. We, the Digital Empowerment Project team, recognize that our organizations and those of our members were founded within a colonizing society that perpetuated the exclusions and erasures of many Native peoples throughout the United States and beyond. We ask you to reflect on the place where you reside and work, and to respect the diversity of cultures and experiences that form the richness of our world and our profession. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker for our first module of the Tech Workshop series, Roz McNulty, who will be presenting on how to use digital assets for documentation, promotion, and programs. Roz is a Clo3D fashion designer, consultant, and online course teacher for Motif.org, and is based in Vancouver, British Columbia. She did her first illustration of clothing on a computer in 1983, and today consults for private clients who want digital doubles, promotional video, and information on the world of 3D apparel. Roz spoke at the Electronic Visualization and Arts Conference in 2019 about the importance of 3D archiving for costumes using 3D apparel software. She's a past president of the local historical fashion museum and does historical fashion photography for catalogs and web pages. Rob has developed a beta version of a virtual reality museum of historical fashion for the OCULUS headset, and her passion is historical fashion, of course, in 3D. It's my pleasure now to welcome Roz McNulty. Roz?
Hi, thank you for such a lovely intro. I'm here today to talk about 3D documentation for historical clothing. It's my absolute passion in terms of basically documenting things for the future in a mathematical way, that pictures are not enough. And this is really important for museums to show their collection and attract larger audience. Once you have a 3D asset, you have the documentation, promotion, and programs for 3D, AR, 2D photographs. It's a really important part of the future. So yes, I have, with the help of lots of special people that I'll mention later, created a VR museum for the Oculus headset, and it is exquisite. And it is a really great experience to be able to put the headset on and walk through this museum. Sorry, but a bit more about myself. Yes, I teach 3D apparel in a clothing software called Clo3D, and I help create digital doubles for clothing companies that need sampling, and again, my passion, the museum. So I have a 30-year history of being a clothing designer and manufacturer. I've done a lot of photography, historical fashion, and the past president of Costume Society. And I did start on a color graphics computer back in 1983. I was doing illustration of airline uniforms to get the actual collar placements so they could make a decision on what color they would choose rather than make a whole bunch of samples up. So basically a very similar thing to what I'm doing now. And it didn't really go anywhere, a bit ahead of its time, but at the same time, computers deal with math and clothing is math, and it was the beginning. When I was working with a local museum, a costume museum, this was their display and storage. And I just knew there were better ways to do it. Nobody was seeing this stuff. The figure on the right is myself. I've been scanned by 3D Look as a 3D model, imported in the software and dressed. The pattern fits me, flatters me, and could be now made into that piece of clothing, which I haven't tried yet. I have learned my software by imitating historical clothing. And it's just been such a pleasure to get it right. But at the same time, you don't always know what's at the back of a garment. You either have to guess or start digging for some photographs. I have no idea what's happening on the back of the pearl pajamas. And I've come across other variations that have made me change the cuffs and such. So the software I'm working with is Clo 3D Apparel. There's also Browseware and Optitex. Clo is the one that I've really concentrated on being good at. And this is how it works, is where you're creating a 2D pattern and then doing a 3D drape, and then you're adding the math of the way the fabric looks, drapes, and then you can put prints and such on top of it, as well as stitches and buttons. So you're getting exact measurements, shape, top stitches, trims, graphics, colors, and math. And I think this is really important. We must remember that our clothing is disintegrating, especially the older clothing. So in retail, how it works is someone comes up with a concept, and in using 3D apparel, you can actually do a prototype. And then you can sit there and say, I want the shoulders longer or shorter. Let's do 2 buttons instead of 3. Let's change that hem length. I want to see the same color as the dress. But either way, you can then do a virtual photo shoot and basically make a decision on that garment for production. So you can do a quick review of your designs, communicate with your customers, your buyers, communicate with your factory, because they're all dealing with the same math versus just a sketch. And then, of course, custom sizing with 3D Look. Sustainability, I think we've all heard that phrase a lot, and of course it makes a gigantic difference if you're using digital samples. 70% cost savings, 90% less wages. I mean, there's a lot of documentation out there on that. Again, there's creativity in terms of documenting in 3D, as I say, which one is real. I think I've given you enough clues already, but that's the real dress. So it's amazing how well you can create a digital double. And these are my courses at Motif, and they're very well received by a lot of fashion industry professionals and those that just want to design for themselves. So one of the most influential talks I've ever been to was at PI Apparel conference back in New York, and it had the head of IKEA's 3D department talking about the value of 3D assets and how it works for IKEA. And basically everything is outputted to 3D. And what that means, it's a one-to-many model, and that basically they scan or create with CAD everything, including the plants, for their photography and otherwise. So it means that once you have all your pieces scanned and created, you can use them for planning, configuration, museum display, print. You have them it all as web assets. You're not recreating it. In their case, interior design, store design, animation, the whole catalog is done with computer-aided design. It's only the people, they're real. But again, it's the flexibility in having these assets that you can use so many different ways, especially with the growing approach of augmented reality. But most important thing is museums. This quote here from Dr. Christopher Brewer talks about, from the National Gallery of Scotland, in 2019 talked about how less than 3% of the collection is visible at one time. That's 3%, I think, every 4 months, and that was the Museum of Scotland. 97% is unseen and heavily booked for access, and that was before COVID. There's limited display, storage, and access. Online museums can help. 3D solutions versus 2D. They don't have the space. The Met Museum has 35,000 within the Costume Institute, representing 5 continents, 7 centuries, from the 15th century to the present, and a lot of it is just photographs. Sometimes it's multiple photographs, but it's just photographs. You're not always seeing the back of a garment. The V&A has 54,000 pieces. And again, that's 2019 figures. And again, it's sometimes just a small photograph documenting that it exists. We want to be able to see what those pieces look like just that bit more before we go on the wait list to see the real thing. This piece here was really important to me because this is at the Met now. It's Wallis Simpson's wedding dress, which was really quite an influential dress, perhaps, of the 1930s, done by Mayne Barker. It is done in the Wallis Simpson blue, which has now disappeared because the dye has faded. And for some reason, you're not allowed to actually even take copies of these photos from the website. I don't know what the policing's really like on that. But to me, it's a really important dress. And it's also important to be able to see the whole dress. So in my VR museum, you can see the whole dress, you can revolve it, you can zoom in on it. And at the same time, there is the right amount of buttons on the sleeve. And I think these are really important details of documenting historical fashion. And you don't see them in pictures. And if you do see them in pictures, they can also be complementing the 3D. So Google has done a brilliant job of museums online. If you want to peruse and take a look at all the stuff that they've put up there, it is just amazing. They've got it all divided into centuries and amazing detail to it. But again, we're still dealing with pictures. I think at one point they do a Vivienne Westwood corset in sort of VR or 3D, but it's not what I'd call real 3D yet. Definitely worth a look though. This is really quite fantastic, and it's actually done by the Brooklyn Museum and Netflix. So for the series The Queen and the Crown in the Brooklyn Museum, they did a virtual exhibit. So they've managed to sort of meld sort of a 2D, 3D effect to the point you can go to the website, enter the museum, and then do a pretend zoom up to the garment. And then when you click on it, you actually get even more information where you can start seeing a movie clip, you can revolve the garment, you can get, it's absolutely, totally brilliant as a beginning of what it could be. And it will be. These museums are coming. And again, this is my museum. So the Oculus headsets are a little ahead of their time in terms of culture, but they're coming, and it is a fantastic experience. I was lucky enough to be approached by Vancouver Film School. They needed a project, a real life project for their students in AR, and they'd heard about my dreams of the museum, and I got a brilliant man. And I'm nervous enough, like Elia Yosef, right? Elia, who has done a fantastic interior, let alone all the details of navigation, all the, shall we say, math of navigation in terms of being able to go up to each garment, revolve it, have a pop-up that explains what's happening there, go off to a special observation room, and then at the same time it comes now in 2 languages. So again, the bigger problem now is Oculus penetrating the market, or other 3D headsets joining the market. But it's definitely part of the future. Again, it's another thing with this whole museum that Elia has done as well, is he's actually made it so, because it's a 3D asset, or because it's a 3D asset the two of us created together, that it can also work on mobile or AR. So it is actually possible to see the whole museum piece, or some of the pieces, on a mobile app. Remember, this is beta, but you can see that, and you can place it in the room with AR. So again, early days. I'd love to see some more texture on these fabrics, but it's getting there. I've had some students contribute, and they created some beautiful pieces. So what I really want to clarify is creating 3D assets gives you assets for promotions, planning, and web. It becomes documentation for future generations. We will know how that Charles James dress came together, because otherwise you're guessing. The ability to study and recreate an original garment, I mean, that's part of our education system. Is one of the ways you really learn a lot about pattern drafting is studying clothing that has been made. And then, of course, with the VR and mixed realities to complement your museum and your promotions. These are really important things in the future and now. So, in conclusion, I've got my contact info if you'd like to know more. I've hopefully got the links up here if you'd like to get an overview on the VR museum. I definitely recommend taking a look at the Queen and the Crown, and of course, the Google Museum as well. And I'm open to any questions you'd like to ask me on this.
Roz, I appreciate it. Let's take a look at what our chat has revealed to us here. First of all, actually, let me ask you a contextual question here. What we're talking about in terms of your experience with Clo 3D is specifically a design-driven process, right? Where you literally are designing the clothing and fashion in the program. Are there aspects of these of the program, though, that deal with actually digitizing existing garments, like a dress or something in a historical collection? Is there like a literally a photographing digitization component to this, or is it purely just a design from a designer?
No, from my aspect is that you're recreating the pattern, which means you're recreating the math of what it should be. But at the same time, there are the possibilities, I should have perhaps touched on them, of other ways of bringing garments in, which is scanning. But the thing with scanning is you get an object or a blurb of fashion versus an actual pattern, flat pattern piece. It's documentation.
Mm-hmm. Walk us through like the Wallace Simpson example. Here's a historic garment she wore. How did that translate into winding up in your museum? Did you actually recreate that from a design standpoint based on the actual garment?
Yes. I've done that research on that for a couple of years. I actually even recreated it firstly in another software called Browseware. And the thing is, every time I'd sort of find the dress again in yet another picture, I'd see another angle that I could learn by and think, oh, okay, I've got to fix that shoulder line. So I have been continuously documenting it by going in, and I just noticed the other day I'm going to have to go back and do something different on the back, neck, and shoulder. There's some detail there that I haven't seen. Again, I'm doing this all from pictures, from all over the world. But it's, for me, it's been continuously evolving because a lot of those pieces are not in front of me. And the same thing with the Jeffrey Bean is there's always a detail I'm not seeing because I'm not seeing the real garment. I'd like to fix some stuff on the back of the coat.
Okay, good. So I know, so some of the questions, and obviously we've got the whole series here is geared for small museums. And I think translating what you're talking about into, what small museums can do to actually take advantage of your wisdom and how can this work. And I know that, there are a couple of questions here regarding specifically the, historical items that are often in folks' collections. And one of the problems that specifically historical societies have is that they are there's just this. Well, you showed the picture of the racks of things that are in a museum storage, and that's typical of any historical society, say across North America, where they've had donated all sorts of clothing from different folks in the community. And like the usual phrase is grandmother's wedding dress type of a thing. How could this technology potentially offer some kind of a solution or resolution to that storage problem? And as you note in, at the Met or wherever it was that, only 3% of the collection overall is even shown. How can this type of technology be translated to a small museum to sort of solve their collections issues and to get more of their collections online, their textile collections in particular?
Well, there are thousands of people that are actually starting to get into CAD design. There seems to be the 3D designers and then the professional clothing people. And it's a wonderful way to learn. I've been able to reach out to my students and get them to start recreating those pieces. So, I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Another thing is that those pieces are all exportable as well as GLBs and different 3D ways. But in terms of actually scanning something in, they do, if I show you what you really should be using, the iPhone now has the ability to scan in LiDAR. It's been out for the last version 12, 13, and the iPad. So you can go up to anything with your phone and you can scan it in 3D. And you will be amazed at what you can actually create. And then you can take it and you can place it in the middle of your room. So that's your first version of scanning grandmother's wedding dress. It's the scanners I've worked with have been reasonable on detail, but you'd also be amazed with what your phone can do. And then you can go up to the next levels of scanners, which again might be too much for a small museum, but then it also might be an investment of the 10 to 15,000 now, and you can start scanning everything with them. I always think of them as museum scanners, but they're continuously coming down in price and getting better in terms of detail as well. The only thing is that you can't quite flatten those out and recreate them. Once you, as I say, you get sort of a solid lump of math versus math that is something that turns into a pattern again. But yes, one should definitely take a look at what you can do with LiDAR scanning on your phone, and at the same time take a look at what exists for scanning at the next levels up in terms of price.
Are there service bureaus that offer this technology that would, you could bring your textiles to a particular service bureau and have them do the work as opposed to investing in the hardware yourself?
I don't know a lot about the museum world, but yes, there are. I'm working with one company. If I would look into AR companies, they do exist. I'm working with one company that has actually gone and bought a $10,000 to $15,000 scanner, and yes, they would probably scan pieces for you. Another thing is it's portable. It's about the size of a shoebox, and it can come to your location. And unfortunately, I don't know a lot about the details of that, if you want to know more, email me and I can find out the exact name of it. But at the same time, get someone with an iPhone firstly and start playing around. I can look up the names of the softwares for that. But with the clothing, because you are documenting clothing and because what we are really doing here is getting the math of the clothing, the important thing to do is do the proper patterns for it, because otherwise it's just, again, an imitation of what it is. I mean, it doesn't have to be exact millimeters, but at the same time, you want to document it in a way it's when the material disappears, the dress can be recreated. As with the Wallace Simpson, the pattern industry went nuts in the 1930s and started actually putting patterns out of her dress. But again, what you want to also think about is the bigger picture of creating assets. And also, there is the talent out there that will be able to contribute to your project. As I say, I've got two of my students. One of them did a zoot suit from the 1940s for me. Another one is, I'm going to forget her name, but at the same time, she had done a whole dissertation on 3D in museums. And she did a gorgeous outfit from the 1920s, beaded chiffon dress. So there's talent out there that can be brought in to help start documenting this clothing. And it's also either a make work project or make talent project. So it's definitely something possible.
Right. Are there university programs that would have folks that are coming up in the pipeline in both the design area and the technology area that would possibly be resources for the museum field to access? Is this a thing in most universities now?
Not really. The problem is that a lot of the industry has been focused on apparel and getting timelines down and costs down and such. And working for the industry is the schools have been slow to adopt. You know, they haven't been able to decide on what platform they might choose. Will it be Clo? Will it be Browseware? Will it be Optitex? Will it be one of the grandparent companies? And so the schools keep sort of teaching the science of the apparel industry, such as marketing, etc., but not the science of pattern drafting, other than, of course, your basic courses. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, my friend now did write her whole dissertation for her master's thesis on 3D apparel. So there's definitely study on what will happen with 3D apparel, but there still seems to be a bit of a gap on teaching 3D apparel. With the online courses, I'm amazed at how many students I have from around the world and from those that want to learn 3D and those are from apparel industry. It's quite a combo.
You know, it seems to me that there might be, a room for this kind of curriculum in schools that are teaching conservation, for example, as a textile conservation. There seems to be sort of some opportunities there where you could digitally conserve some garment, from a historical garment, say, so that it cleans up it digitally, whereas in real life you may not be able to because of the fragility of the garment, that type of a thing. And that would really be a fascinating thing to see where that would wind up, because I would imagine from a historical standpoint, the value of that is incredible. And again, you'd be able to, have much more access to the conserved garment. What would it look like if it didn't have this giant hole in it, say, or something like that, which would be very helpful for something that would be, a medieval garment, say, something like that.
And that's so possible. Again, in one of my lessons, I show how to take your iPhone and literally take a picture of a little bit of fabric, and then with the dedicated software, you can actually create a whole print and then use that for your dress. And then, of course, there's services that do scanning, and it ends up being sort of several layers of texture maps that allow you to get the impression of a bumpy wool or a shiny beadiness, and it's absolutely fascinating. And then there's the companies that do scan fabric professionally, such as Swatchbook. So it's what I'd say is, in many ways, it's an emerging world. And what really changed it was in 2016 when Flow came out, and it was an inexpensive program versus an industry software that had a too high a price. Once Flow came out at about $500 a year, it meant the whole world could start learning how to do it. And they have.
So a number of the questions that are coming through the chat have to do with this idea of details and textures. And here's one question that says, how is it possible to include interiors and inner linings and so forth within the 3D model, the inside, say, of the garment? Is that something that you would be able to construct?
Yes. Oh, definitely. You can collect different pattern components in terms of shirts, and you can, create a shirt and export it and be able to bring it back in, say, when you've actually done a jacket and pants. You can also, I'm sorry, I'm losing track of the question. Anyways,
different linings and sort of the details of the document,
that you can actually do a sub-layer or layers, and you can do something really racy like a hot pink lace lining for something. You can do transparencies. I mean, it's if one were to look up It's Clo 3D or any of those names on Instagram, it's just amazing what some people can do. You can recreate fur. It's up to your imagination on how far you want to take it. And that's why I've really enjoyed the historical, because you do have to recreate fur, beading, reflection.
Here's a question. I'm a garment technology researcher and lecturer, and I'm excited to see the extent to which virtual samples can demonstrate the pattern cutting and construction of historical garments. What do you perceive are the possibilities and limitations of this?
Well, I don't see any limitations, because it's one of the main reasons is whenever I see a dress, I start taking it apart, trying to figure out how it came together, especially if it's some sort of amazing incorporation of a bust dart or a bustle of some sort that's part of the main skirt fabric. So it's really just a matter of observing it. And I've done reconstructions, digital doubles of things like jackets, custom label jackets. And I just bring the jacket in, I start measuring it, and I get the exact sleeve length that I want. And then what I do is I look at it again and I say, oh no, that has to be this way. And it's a work in progress to do it. Sometimes you can even get your original pattern for that jacket, and then you just make it look like that. I'm working on one dress, which I probably can't talk about, so we'll just leave it. But at the same time, it's amazing what you can do with dresses in terms of and other outfits. At one point, I got an inquiry from a museum. I think it was in Scotland. They wanted some sort of tomato coat, or anyways, I had the whole pattern and coat done based on the drawing before they would say yes, and they still never said yes, which was sort of sad. But they were just asking for a price, but it was too inspiring for me to just pause on.
Let's see, another question here. Are museums going to need a range of software and tools for creating their 3D collections, different software for digitizing clothing and other materials and other kinds of objects? And another question is, sort of the non-textile types of things in a museum, including, art, sculpture, 3D sculpture, especially paper, those kinds of things? What are the aspects of, like, what do you see museums needing to invest in order to fully digitize themselves?
Well, I have one friend that's an inventor, Aaron Hilton, and he's actually created something that works with the iPad. And so for years we have been actually scanning, and I believe he did a whole commission job for one of the museums in Japan by going around and scanning assets. So what I'm trying to point out with the phone and the iPad and the LiDAR scanning is you can do it really cheap or sort of cheap. And then again, you can go to that next level of 10 to 15,000 for, I always, because it's a double handhold for the next LiDAR up. And then of course, I think they go up to 30 to 50,000, but it's not, that's not a hard thing to do, especially when you're talking about objects. If anything, objects become easier because they're not going to move once they've been created. A lot of times, if you were doing a cup or a statue, it's very easy to get. It's just a matter of it being well lit and moving around it, taking lots and lots of pictures that also read the depth of where the photography is. So that's how LiDAR works, is that you have one capturing the color and two eyes, so to speak, capturing the depth.
The difference in quality between your iPhone and the more substantial investment in the technology, is that show as in the output? I mean, it really makes a difference. iPhone, you're going to get a lot more, I'm imagining, pixelation and that type of thing, and maybe the color isn't as good. I'm putting words in your mouth. You tell me what is the difference?
Almost. I mean, another thing about the LiDAR scanning is that it's actually accurate. You can scan a whole room, and yes, it looks a bit blurry at times, depending on how many passes you make and what quality you render at. But at the same time, you can then see that the wall's 14 feet. How long is that wall? It says 14 feet. So that's very interesting. So yes, iPhone probably will be not quite the resolution you want, but it's certainly a beginning to see what it could be. And the company that I'm working with that does the AR, Cella AR, they have done a lot of work with virtual runners. And so they showed me the new scanner they got in December, but I haven't seen a lot of the work. But I guarantee with the detail of you think of a new fashionable runner with all their textures and laces and such, that if they can make it look like it's real, they can make it look like it's on your foot. And that's not, of course, their only company. AR is going to continue to be really, really big. And not many people really comprehend what that is yet, but it still means that you can take a scan and you can place it in your room and you can walk around it and take a look at it. And you can do that. You can do that. Now you can do it with IKEA's Place, I believe it's called, where you can place a chair in the room and make a decision. I think where you have to possibly consider some investment is sometimes when you're scanning something, although the softwares are now getting better at this, it will pick up the room or the floor as well as the object. So, and you might have to go in and do some editing or get someone that knows 3D to do some editing.
What sort of person, if you were to have somebody on staff to supervise this, what sorts of qualifications should they have? Do they actually need to be technologists, or are they curators, or a combination of both?
Well, for some reason, I just think them as someone that's working in 3D. So I don't think they really need to be a technologist other than knowing the 3D softwares. And I'm not going to be able to name them all offhand. And it's sort of one thing I've always wanted to go back and do some more learning on, but I've been too busy. But it's not hard to do. Or rather, once you start studying it, it tends to become a passion and you can become very good at it. So really, it's just someone who is into 3D creation and trying to think offhand the softwares. But think it would be obvious with a search what those softwares would be. There's, you know, virtual reality is a slightly different thing than 3D, but they both use the same components. A VR will need 3D components. And the same thing with the dresses I'm doing. They get exported as an OBJ or a GLB, etc., and they become a 3D component. So 3D Max, okay, there's one software in the back of the brain. So they need to be versed in 3D softwares, and that might be enough to start getting a few interested people coming to you to talk.
Yeah, okay. Question. We are using Arctech Leo and EVA scanners to create our digital collections of real-world assets. Is there a platform online, is there a platform online where you recommend we can share these 3D models so that people can access them and learn ways to use them in functional ways?
Okay, probably best to send me an email. I've been part of the VR community in town for some time, and there's quite a few people that are actually working on sort of interactive galleries and such. And you know, I can think of Joseph, but I can't remember Joseph's company name at the moment. But yes, those things exist, and I think that's another thing you shouldn't do is build everything. Is there's people that have built good 3D display spaces out there, and you shouldn't try and build the whole car. You should get a good expert to help you out on that whole sort of simulation and taking that, concentrate on the assets, and get someone good to do for display. But yes, there's a lot more of those rooms happening all the time now.
Here's a question that I'm sure you can answer. How can I see the OCULUS Museum? That is your museum.
Again, email me directly. Again, I assume we'll have the links up yet again, but roz@fashionic.ca. That's Fashion Innovation Center. Or I think there might be a contact on the vrfashionmuseum.com page, but you can go take a look at the page and reach out to me there. I can always send you the bill directly, and I am working on getting it to the Oculus store, and I will. It's just a matter of time. It's been a busy Christmas.
Museum people are notorious for loving detail and cataloging things and the like. And can you explain a little bit the process of embedding metadata in all of this? Because I'm imagining, well, you said that is one of the major advantages of this, is that you're able to really embed a whole lot of stuff in it that you can't necessarily embed in 2D.
Oh, definitely. You got to think of it in many ways like hashtags that you can put when it was made, what fabric it was. I'll do it in way what the designer was, who wore it, who owned it, who donated it. I mean, all that becomes information that the minute you go and say donations, that the names of everybody will come up, and everything that they've donated will be there. So that's what the power of metadata is, that it sort of all stuck to that garment or that 3D scan now, is that it becomes searchable in that way. So that's the great advantage of metadata. I mean, you could take it even further and start putting that into different languages and such. And that can be quite powerful. What city it was worn in. I mean, it goes on, because especially with clothing and items, they all tell a story. And the more sort of words you're attaching to that object or file, the easier it's going to be to find.
A related question to that is, do you recommend a particular platform to organize our collections of scanned 3D assets, and which ones? Any thoughts on Sketchfab? But is that
Yeah.
How do you actually create the organization?
I'd have to do a bit of research on that. I certainly could do some research on that. It's probably a great start. It's a good, healthy company. It looks like it's going to be around for a bit. And again, that's where I probably reach out to the AR company that I work with, because they're working with companies and cataloging the data. So, but there's always a VR community to reach out to, usually in every city or online, and you can start talking to people or checking the groups on that one. Offhand, I don't know anything, but I'm willing to look it up.
What do you see are the links between sort of historical archaeological data that we might be able to recreate certain, clothing from just the archaeological record? For example, the thing that comes to mind is when you see actual recreations of one of the pharaoh's faces in 3D, that they've used archaeological, and similarly with, obviously a lot of the costumes, clothing, fashions, whatever of, say, ancient Rome or whatever, there's a lot of speculations where it's based on two-dimensional frescoes and the like. What are the aspects of what we're talking about here that could really be used to round out the historical picture based on, say, archaeological evidence? Is there a tie-in there?
Oh, definitely. That is really exciting. Imagine, I agree. I've seen the reconstruction of faces, but yes, we should be able to do clothing. And one of my inspired projects would probably be the Queen Elizabeth dress that they just found the prayer cloth from in a church in northern England, I believe it is. So they finally found something that actually belonged to Queen Elizabeth I. So they actually have a snippet of that fabric, and it could be the basis of a recreation of one of those dresses. And again, I think the more and more we read historical, whatever has been left as a message of what they were wearing, it gives us, again, the way to recreate, especially if it's a body shape and such, because the body shapes will have changed too. We can recreate that body shape to be what it should have been in Egypt in terms of height and such. And then again, it's only your imagination that will stop you, and there's no such thing as ever stopping as an artist.
Yeah. A related question, and I don't know whether this is left field or not, but are there any diversity, equity issues that go into the actual, what do you call it, not body double, but effectively the mannequins that you present in, say, AR and so forth? Are there issues with representing a particular racial makeup or a body type or anything along those lines that you would look for as you're presenting, say, the garments on a person that's designed or something along those lines?
Yes, I've been doing some work with the male models or the male representations in Clo, and it was stunning how the different, I think there's 5 or 6 models within, how they were actually built differently. That there was so much difference between the Asian and the obvious European and such. And I thought, wow, I thought they were all supposed to be a size 40. But they actually shaped the mannequins slightly different. And I think they had the same thing for the women. So yes, I think it's also with, as I say, the 3D look scanning, the fact that you can do a real scan of yourself and dress it, is the difference in the clothing versus a generic model is really, really interesting. Because it looks real. It looks much more real when it's real measurements versus model measurements, or versus even a contrived model measurement. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I was just, yeah, it's a little bit of a left field, but all of our museums and our field are just so focused right now on equity and DEIJ and how we actually represent different communities in our presentations. And it would seem that it's somewhat a relevant discussion as we're approaching this, and especially if these are designed garments and the like, to be able to drape them on folks that would, say, represent our communities better, represent not just the standard, say, ideal body shape or whatever, but all different types of shapes, that type of a thing. So
Yeah, well,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry. I mean, I feel that would be a great way to start is get that body shape that you want and scan it. I've done my whole family as tests with 3D Look so that I can actually make them clothing. I don't have to stand there with a measuring tape with them now.
Right.
So, I mean, that's if one can do it with that, one could do it with the nationalities, and then one could also perhaps resize it for the garment you want to put on it. But that's probably enough of all of that today.
Getting response to our conversation about archaeology. Hi, I work with Clo3D and archaeological textiles, small fragments in parentheses. Do you know anyone doing this? I have trouble finding a community. So are there any other folks out there that are actually doing this work?
Well, the only thing I think the best place for the Clo community is actually Instagram. Start doing postings. And I know that sounds silly, but Instagram, I can't remember, has 32,000 followers, or I haven't checked the numbers recently, but the Clo community and Marvelous Designer community, which is the same software, have thousands of users. Yes, that's right, thousands of users, and they all show off, and there's a level of support as well. So there's an amazing YouTube community with some great people on it, and then there's the fact that everybody's showing their work, which means you find people, you meet people because of that, and you can reach out to them. I'm trying to think who I've actually met, but a lot of times if someone does something that really interests you, you can reach out to them and say, that was great. And all of a sudden they become an associate or conversation. So it's a great place to start, is start publicizing what you're doing, and you'll find other people that are doing it in Clo. Just make sure you use the Clo hashtags.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. One thing that I could suggest is that, it might be a subject for our Museum Learning Hub community forum to sort of post on there and see if there's anybody else in our immediate small museum nationwide community or North American community that's interested in this, that has some experience and maybe wants to pursue the conversation a little bit further. I know that each of our regional museum associations have networks of folks that we can actually reach out to as well and see whether there's a group of people that want to continue this conversation, because it strikes me that a lot of the of this information is very rich, and with the opportunity for creativity for our museum folks to be able to sort of expand their horizons, exercise their imaginations, and work collaboratively with fashion designers, with folks that we might not have even thought about. And certainly the AR/VR piece of it is a new frontier for us. So this is really, I think, very ripe for further conversation. So the Museum Hub, museum-hub.org is where to go for that, and also to be in touch with your regional museum association would probably be a good spot too for us to continue that conversation in conferences and workshops and the like. So,
right.
For sure. See, where are we on time? We got a couple minutes more here, and there's one. Oh, Roz, which software do you recommend I use for matching the fit of 3D clothing assets to actual scans of people?
Okay, there's hands down, it's 3D Look. Basically, again, you take your iPhone, I think they do it Android, you take a picture of the person from the front and the side, and then it will it creates a whole 3D scan with all your measurements and an OBJ that you can put into any software, an OBJ model. So if you really want to get an accurate scan, I have been really happy with the work I've done with them, or with the scans. And I've also watched the company since pretty well started. I think they're getting awards all the time. That's 3dlook.com. And again, mention my name if you want, or get in touch with me, and I'll make sure someone gets in touch with you. And I know there's other scanning companies out there, but the reason I'd probably push 3D Look firstly is because I'm working with them, or have worked with them. And at the same time, they're not coming from the medical profession. They're actually coming from the clothing profession, because there's a lot of 3D scanning softwares out there that come from medical, which is a slightly different type of scanning. So that's why I like 3D Look. It's great. I use it in my classes. In the advanced CLO, you actually get the opportunity to scan yourself and make a garment. And I must admit, it's amazing how few people will actually scan themselves and make a garment. They borrow me or something. But it's still great science.
Roz, I think we're ending our time frame here for you. Do you have any closing thoughts, words of wisdom, and the like for everyone on our webinar today?
Well, please reach out to me, roz@fashionic.ca. I really want to create an amazing community of VR fashion online. And at the same time, the museum's built in many ways. What we really need is people contributing to it, and probably more than myself doing it. Elia's so busy, I can't get him to even help put this up to OCULUS at the moment, but I'll find others that'll help. And to keep thinking as people are about documenting those materials and those styles that we're not going to see if we don't make that effort. And to remember too, perhaps, that we're still at the beginning of all of this, and the scanning and the pixelization and all the qualities are only going to get better. And starting now means you're probably going to be ahead of the game when it's really big time.
Well, thank you very much again for your words of wisdom and your expertise, Roz. We're all very grateful for your presentation. And thank you all for attending today's webinar. Hopefully we'll see you for our second tech webinar for this module on image-based approaches to 3D collections, presented by Carla Schroeder and Martin Lum of the Cultural Heritage Imaging Association in San Francisco. So thanks again, and be well, everyone. Take care.